There is a moment right before someone changes forever. It doesn't look like much. No speech, no announcement, no warning, just silence. The person who used to explain themselves stops explaining. The person who used to chase approval stops chasing. The person who used to answer every message within minutes goes quiet for days, and everyone around them thinks the same thing. They're giving up. They're isolating. Something's wrong with them. They are wrong, because psychology has known this pattern for over 100 years. That silence isn't surrender. It's the last stage before a comeback so complete the people who doubted you won't recognize you. Carl Jung, one of the most important minds in the history of psychology, described this exact pattern. He didn't call it a comeback. He called it something stranger. He called it the return of the self. And once you understand what that means, you will never look at your quiet moments the same way again. If you've ever gone silent after something painful, if you've ever pulled away from people, from noise, from explaining yourself, if you've ever wondered whether that silence meant you were falling apart, stay with me for the next hour, because I'm going to walk you through exactly why you went quiet, what was happening biologically while you disappeared, what Jung understood about that process a century before modern psychology caught up to him, and exactly what usually comes next. By the end of this, you're going to see your own life differently. Let's start with a question almost nobody asks out loud. Why do the strongest comebacks always start in silence? Think about every real transformation you've ever witnessed. Not the fake ones, not the ones staged for an audience, the real ones. Someone gets humiliated publicly, and instead of firing back, they go quiet. Someone gets left by a partner they thought they'd spend their life with, and instead of chasing them, they disappear from social media entirely. Someone gets passed over for a promotion they deserved, and instead of complaining to everyone who'll listen, they stop talking about work altogether. Weeks pass, sometimes months, and then, without warning, they show up different, calmer, sharper, unbothered in a way that unsettles the people who once counted them out. What happened in between? That gap, that quiet stretch where nothing seemed to be happening, where from the outside it looked like nothing was going on at all. That's the part almost nobody talks about. That's the part this video is really about, because something is happening in that silence. Something measurable. Something with a name in psychological research. Something biological, something neurological, and something Jung was writing about back in the early 1900s, decades before anyone had a functional MRI machine to prove him right. And once you understand what's actually happening in that gap, you'll probably realize something uncomfortable. It might be happening to you right now. You might be in the middle of your own comeback and not even know it. You might have mistaken the quietest, most important chapter of your life for a breakdown. So let's take that apart, piece by piece, starting with what the actual research says. Let's start with the research, because I don't want you to just take my word for any of this. Psychologists have a specific name for what happens after someone is hurt, embarrassed, betrayed, or overlooked, and then rebuilds themselves into something stronger. It's called post-traumatic growth, not to be confused with just healing. Healing gets you back to your old baseline. Post-traumatic growth takes you somewhere you have never been before, somewhere better than where you started. Two researchers, Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, spent decades studying this exact phenomenon at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. They interviewed people who had survived everything from serious illness to combat to relationship betrayal, and they found a consistent pattern. People who go through real emotional pain and actually process it rather than suppress it often come out the other side with 5 specific, measurable changes. Number 1, a deeper appreciation for life. Small things start to matter again. Number 2, stronger, more honest relationships. The surface level connections fall away, and the real ones get deeper. Number 3, a greater sense of personal strength. A quiet knowing that says, if I survive that, I can survive almost anything. Number 4, new possibilities they never considered before. Career changes, new relationships, new identities they wouldn't have found any other way. Number 5, spiritual or philosophical growth, a shift in how they see meaning, purpose, and their place in the world. But here's the part almost everyone misses. That transformation doesn't happen during the pain itself. It happens in the withdrawal that follows it. The nervous system needs to go quiet in order to process what happened. It's not being lazy. It's not giving up. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Think about it this way. When you cut your hand, your body doesn't keep using that hand normally while it heals. It protects it. It limits movement. It redirects resources toward repair. Emotional injuries work the same way. When something painful happens, your brain pulls resources away from social performance and redirects them toward processing. That's why you don't feel like talking. That's why crowds feel exhausting. That's why you crave silence. So when you feel yourself pulling back after something painful, understand what's actually happening. Your brain isn't shutting down. It's reorganizing. It's doing surgery on itself, and surgery requires stillness. This is backed by decades of clinical observation, not just theory. And it sets up something important for the rest of this video, because if withdrawal is actually a productive, necessary stage, then why does it feel so wrong when we're in it? That question brings us to the next part, because the answer isn't psychological, it's social. Here's the problem. We live in a culture that treats silence like failure. If you're not posting, you're falling off. If you're not responding immediately, you're being dramatic or playing games. If you're not explaining yourself the moment something happens, you're being difficult or avoiding accountability. So the moment someone goes quiet in order to actually heal, the world around them starts whispering. Friends check in with that concerned tone that somehow makes things worse. Family members ask if everything is okay, in a way that feels more like judgment dressed up as care. Coworkers notice you've gone quiet in meetings and start speculating, and the person going through this process starts to doubt the very thing that's saving them. This is where most comebacks die, not because the person wasn't strong enough, because the social pressure around them convinced them that quiet meant broken, and they abandoned the process too early to let it finish. Psychologists call this normative social influence. It's the pressure to match the behavior everyone around you expects, even when that behavior goes directly against what you actually need in that moment. It is genuinely one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. Studies on conformity, going back to Solomon Ash's famous experiments in the 1950s, showed that people will change their own stated perception of reality just to match a group, even when the group is obviously wrong. If that's true for something as simple as judging the length of a line on a piece of paper, imagine how much more powerful that pressure becomes when it comes to something as personal as grief, heartbreak, or humiliation. If you've ever felt guilty for going quiet after something painful happened to you, this is why. It was never a character flaw. It was never proof that you were too sensitive or too dramatic. It was social pressure doing exactly what it does best, making the healthy choice feel like the wrong one. And here's something worth sitting with. The people who pressure you to move on faster are almost never doing it out of malice. Most of the time, your silence makes them uncomfortable because it reminds them of their own unprocessed pain. It's easier for them to tell you to hurry up than to sit with the discomfort of watching you go through something real. So the pressure isn't really about you, it's about their own relationship with silence. Understanding that changes everything, because once you see the pressure for what it actually is, it loses a lot of its power over you. Now let's go somewhere most psychology content never goes. Let's go into the body. Emotional withdrawal isn't only psychological, it's biological, down to the hormone level. When someone experiences a major emotional hit, whether it's rejection, betrayal, failure, or loss, cortisol spikes almost immediately. That's the primary stress hormone. For a while, cortisol keeps you alert, defensive, and hyper aware. This is useful in the short term. It's the reason you can function through a crisis, get through a breakup conversation, or hold it together at a funeral. But the body cannot sustain that state indefinitely. Chronically elevated cortisol starts to damage sleep, memory, and immune function. So eventually, the body forces a shift, whether you consciously choose it or not. Sleep patterns change. Melatonin production increases as the body tries to push you into deeper, longer rest. This is one of the most consistent findings in stress physiology. After a major emotional event, many people report wanting to sleep far more than usual. That's not laziness. That is your brain forcing a repair cycle in the same way it would if you had the flu. Emotional injury and physical injury trigger overlapping biological repair systems. This has been demonstrated repeatedly in research on social pain, most notably by psychologist Naomi Eisenberger, whose work showed that rejection activates some of the same neural regions as physical pain. Your brain, quite literally, does not fully distinguish between "I broke my arm" and "I was betrayed by someone I trusted." Both trigger a threat response, both trigger a recovery response, and recovery, in both cases, requires rest. There's also a seasonal layer to this that almost nobody connects to their comeback story. Researchers have long studied what's sometimes called seasonal affective patterns, the way sunlight exposure and darkness affect mood, energy, motivation, and social withdrawal. In darker months, with shorter days and less sunlight, serotonin production tends to drop, and melatonin release shifts earlier in the day. The result is a natural pull inward. Less socializing, more reflection, more sleep, lower motivation for performance and output. So if your quiet season, the period where you pulled away from everyone, happened to line up with the colder, darker months of the year, that was not a coincidence, and it was not weakness. Your biology and your psychology were pointing you toward the exact same thing at the exact same time. Rest before reconstruction. This matters because it removes the shame from the equation entirely. You weren't lazy. You weren't avoiding your life. Your hormones, your sleep architecture, and even the amount of sunlight hitting your eyes were all working together to force you into a recovery state your body knew you needed, whether your mind agreed with it or not. There's one more biological piece worth understanding. The part of the brain most active during this repair phase is called the default mode network, the network that switches on when you're not focused on an external task, staring out a window, lying in bed, walking without headphones in. For years, scientists assumed this network was doing nothing. We now know the opposite. It's where scattered memories and emotions get organized into something coherent, where a painful experience slowly turns into a lesson instead of just staying a wound. That's why so many people get their clearest insight in the shower, or on a walk, or right before falling asleep. Every time you fill that silence with a notification or a scroll, you interrupt the exact process that would have gotten you through this faster. Once the body finishes that repair cycle, something interesting happens. Energy returns, motivation returns, but it doesn't return as the same person who went quiet in the first place. Which brings us to a much deeper question. Why do some people feel like they were never quite the same as everyone else, even before the pain that triggered their withdrawal? Now, here's something personal, and if this section describes you, I want you to know that in advance. Some people have felt like an outsider for as long as they can remember. Not tragic, not dramatic, just quietly different, a little too aware of things other people didn't seem to notice, a little too observant in rooms full of small talk, a little too affected by things other people seem to brush off without a second thought. Carl Jung had an explanation for this, and it's one of his most enduring contributions to psychology. He believed every person carries what he called a persona, the mask we present to the outside world in order to be accepted by society. The persona is useful. It helps us function at work, in families, in relationships. It's not fake exactly, but it's not the whole truth either. Underneath that mask, Jung argued, exists a truer self, one shaped by instincts, unresolved experiences, and parts of our personality we've learned to hide because they weren't accepted by the people around us. Most people never separate the two. They live entirely as the mask, and they never notice the gap because the mask fits comfortably enough. But some people, usually the ones who were hurt, dismissed, misunderstood, or forced to grow up faster than their peers, develop an early awareness that the mask isn't the whole story. They can feel the gap between who they're presenting and who they actually are. That awareness is often what creates the feeling of being different. It can feel isolating, even lonely, especially in childhood or adolescence, when fitting in feels like the most important thing in the world. But Jung argued that this early awareness is actually the beginning of something most people never reach in their entire lives. He called it individuation. Individuation is the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, as opposed to who your family, your culture, or your circumstances told you to be. It requires facing. Here's something that explains a lot about why comebacks take longer than people expect. Emotional memory works differently than regular factual memory. You might not remember every detail of a painful moment. You might not remember the exact words that were said, or the exact date, or what you were wearing. But your body remembers how it felt. Psychologists call this state-dependent memory. It refers to the way certain emotional or physiological states can trigger memories, or in this case, feelings, that were encoded during a similar state in the past. A specific tone of voice, a certain kind of silence in a room, a particular type of rejection, even from a completely unrelated person. All of it can trigger the original feeling, sometimes instantly, even years after the actual event, even when the logical conscious mind has fully moved on. This is why some people can genuinely believe they're over something, and still feel a sudden jolt of the old fear or hurt when something even slightly similar happens again. A new partner takes a little too long to text back, and suddenly the anxiety from an old relationship comes flooding back, fully formed, in seconds. That's not a failure to heal. That is your nervous system doing exactly its job, protecting you from a pattern it once got seriously hurt by. It's an old alarm system, still wired correctly, still trying to keep you safe. The real shift, the thing that actually changes state-dependent memory over time, happens when you give your nervous system new evidence, new outcomes, new proof that this time is genuinely different from last time. Slowly, repetition by repetition, the old emotional memory gets rewritten, not erased, never fully erased, rewritten and layered over with new experience, until the old memory has less and less influence over your present day reactions. This is part of why comebacks take longer than most people expect, and longer than social media makes it look. You're not just changing your mindset with a single decision or a single motivational moment. You are slowly, patiently retraining a nervous system that has been protecting you in its own imperfect way for years. That process cannot be rushed, no matter how much pressure the people around you apply. And this is exactly why the quiet, misunderstood, socially penalized withdrawal we've been talking about this whole video is so essential. It's not avoidance, it's the only environment in which this kind of deep rewiring can actually happen. Now let's take everything you've just learned and flip it completely. Let's flip everything you just heard piece by piece. Every part of this that felt like weakness while you were living it, going quiet, feeling different, needing more rest than everyone else, carrying old emotional memory you couldn't quite explain, is actually the architecture of a comeback most people never manage to build. Going quiet isn't collapse, it's recalibration. It's your mind clearing space to do the deepest kind of work there is. Feeling different isn't a flaw to fix, it's early individuation, the very process Jung said most people spend an entire lifetime avoiding because it's uncomfortable and unfamiliar. Needing more rest isn't laziness or lack of discipline. It's your biology, your cortisol, your melatonin, your entire nervous system, preparing you for the next chapter with the only resource that actually allows deep repair, which is time. Carrying old emotional memory isn't a weakness or an overreaction. It's proof that something happened to you that mattered, and that your mind cared enough to protect you from it happening again. Here's the truth almost no one tells you because it doesn't fit neatly into a motivational quote. The people who never go quiet, who never withdraw, who never sit with discomfort, rarely have real comebacks. They have reactions, quick, reflexive responses that look like strength on the surface, but that never actually resolve anything underneath. A real comeback requires the exact process that feels like falling apart while you're inside of it. Jung believed real transformation only happens after confronting what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we would rather ignore, deny, or project onto other people. He wrote that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and we will call it fate. You cannot skip that confrontation and still arrive at the version of yourself waiting on the other side of it. There is no shortcut through the shadow. There's only through. So if you've been quiet, if you felt different for as long as you can remember, if you've needed more time than everyone else around you seemed to need to process the same kind of pain, you weren't behind them. You were doing the actual work while they were still performing. So how do you actually know where you are in this process? Here are three signs, drawn from the research, that tend to show up right before the visible part of a comeback begins. Sign 1. Things that used to upset you deeply start to feel smaller. Not because you've suppressed the feeling, but because you've genuinely processed it. Someone brings up the situation, or the person, or the failure, and instead of a flood of emotion, you notice something closer to mild interest. That flatness isn't numbness. It's often the first sign that the state-dependent memory we talked about has started to lose its grip. Sign 2. You stop needing people to understand what happened to you. Early in the process, most people have an intense need to be understood, to explain themselves, to make sure everyone knows the full story and takes their side. As the comeback progresses, that need quietly fades, not because you've given up on being understood, but because your sense of self no longer depends on other people's verdict about what happened to you. Sign 3. You start making decisions from curiosity instead of fear. Early withdrawal is often driven by fear, fear of being hurt again, fear of judgment, fear of repeating the same mistake. But somewhere in the middle of the quiet period, the motivation underneath your decisions starts to shift. You stop asking, how do I avoid getting hurt again? And start asking, what do I actually want now? That shift from fear-based decisions to curiosity-based decisions is one of the clearest markers that the repair work is nearly finished. If you noticed even one of these three signs in your own life recently, take that seriously. It's not a small thing. It's usually the quiet, unannounced beginning of the part everyone else eventually calls shocking. Let's be direct with each other for a moment. If any part of this video felt uncomfortably familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive. You are not too much. You are not behind in life compared to people who seem to move on from things faster than you do. Millions of people go through this exact cycle in almost the exact same order. Withdrawal, self-doubt, a period of feeling different or disconnected, a slow, invisible rebuilding process that no one else gets to witness. It's such a common, well documented pattern that psychologists have entire research frameworks built entirely around it. Post traumatic growth, individuation, state dependent emotional memory. These aren't rare, exotic phenomena that only apply to extreme cases. They are well researched, well documented parts of ordinary human experience. So if you've ever sat alone, wondering why you needed so much more time to recover from something that everyone else around you seemed to move past in a matter of days, understand this clearly. You weren't weaker than them. You were processing something real inside a system, your mind and your body working together, that was doing exactly what it was designed to do at exactly the pace it needed to do it. The people who eventually witness your comeback will never see any of this part. They won't see the withdrawal, the extra sleep, the quiet nights spent trying to make sense of what happened. They will only see the result, standing in front of them, fully formed. But you will always know what it actually took to get there, and that knowledge becomes part of the strength itself. Here's the truth about every real comeback: it never announces itself. It doesn't happen on the day you decide to be strong or post a confident caption for everyone to see. It happens quietly, in the weeks you thought nothing was changing at all, in the nights you slept longer than usual without knowing your body was repairing something invisible, in the conversations you chose not to have because you finally understood you didn't owe everyone an explanation, in the version of yourself you were slowly becoming, one quiet day at a time, without a single person watching, without a single person applauding. Jung once wrote that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and we will call it fate. Maybe that's what a comeback really is underneath all of it. Not a single dramatic moment, not a speech, not a public reveal. A slow, quiet act of making sense of everything that happened to you until one day, without meaning to, without planning it, you become someone your past self genuinely wouldn't recognize. That's why it shocks people when they finally see it. They weren't watching the process. They never got to see any of it. They only see what's standing in front of them now. There's something almost unfair about that if you think about it. The hardest part, the part that actually required something from you, happens with no witnesses at all. Nobody claps for the night you chose to sleep instead of doom scrolling through old messages. Nobody applauds the conversation you didn't have, the reply you didn't send, the version of the story you didn't tell just to make yourself look better. But maybe that's exactly why it means something. Maybe a comeback only counts when it happens without an audience, when the only person who has to believe it's real is you. By the time anyone else notices, you've already done the work. Their surprise is just confirmation of something you already knew was true. If any part of this explains something you've been feeling but could never quite put into words, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments. Where are you right now in this exact process? Are you still in the quiet part, the part that feels like nothing is happening? Or are you already starting to feel the shift, the first small signs of the person you're becoming? I read every single comment on these videos, and honestly, some of the most powerful moments in this entire community happen right there, in that comment section, where someone realizes for the first time that they're not the only one going through this. If this video meant something to you, subscribe. This channel is built entirely around understanding the psychology behind the moments nobody explains to you, but that almost everybody eventually goes through. One more thing before you go. A lot of you have asked in the comments on earlier videos how to actually work through this process, not just understand it intellectually, the way we've talked about it today, but actually apply it to your own life, step by step. That's exactly why we put together Product Name, a guided journal built around the psychological stages you just learned about in this video: withdrawal, reflection, identity, rebuilding. It's not a generic gratitude journal with the same 5 prompts repeated every day. Every prompt inside it is built to move you deliberately through the exact stages Jung and modern psychological research describe, in an order that actually makes sense instead of leaving you to figure it out alone. The link is in the description if you want a structured way to move through your own comeback, instead of doing it in the dark the way most people are forced to. No pressure either way, because whether you use it or not, one thing is already true by the simple fact that you watched this entire video. Something in you has already started changing, and it's only a matter of time before everyone else notices it too.